I think there's a huge anti-military press in this country.
There is.
And I think that they will take any incident with the military and blow it completely out of proportion. And I think that the military, knowing that, knows that, you know, when someone strikes a match, it might as well be a forest fire, because if the press gets a hold of it, it's going to become a forest fire when it was just a match to begin with. And I think that they are very paranoid. And so, and what happens is they stumble over themselves sometimes to shut down stuff that if they would just get it out there quickly, that it'll blow over in a few days. I mean, the way they handled when the Iowa blew up at sea, remember that?
Yeah,
and
that
trying
was
to
with the
blame
powder.
this sailor because saying he was a homosexual that committed suicide. I mean, it was ridiculous. None of the evidence ever even came close to any of this, and there was no evidence that the young sailor was ever homosexual. Accidents happen when you're working with munitions.
Sure.
But I think that this paranoia of it causes them to overreact to stuff, which then causes them, the press, to even get more interested in it, because then they're smelling cover-up, and it just stacks it on top of each other. You know, just a real brief story. My uncle was at one time when he first became the head of public relations for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, there was a fire in a home, and the vice president was in this home, only it wasn't his wife's house, it was his girlfriend's house. And he thought she was still in there. She got out, so he rushed back in to save her life and couldn't find her and died in there. Well, of course, you know, my uncle gets a call in the middle of the night that this happened, but he said there was two ways to do it, and one was just to come right out with, Goodyear wanted him to cover this up somehow. And he said, no, they're going to find out. You know, when they pull his body out, he's going to be there. Let's just get it out there and get it over with. It'll be a story for a few days, and then they'll all forget it. But if you try and start covering up stuff, you know, then that's when it becomes. But I get the paranoia because of the anti-military. You know.
Can you imagine if Michael Moore or some self-serving, you know, person like this?
If that would have happened, if Michael Moore would have been around when this happened.
Sure.
You know, he would have done a movie about it.
And he's just the tip of the iceberg. I think that I was talking to Sally about this. There's a book called AWOL, Frank Schaeffer and a woman whose husband is a colonel at Parris Island now, I think. You know the story, Rich. They write about what's happened with the so-called upper classes in this country have abandoned the military. In fact, they hold them in high disdain. This is an outgrowth of the 60s and 70s and all of that stuff. And they write about that, where it used to be that the president's son would volunteer for the military. You know, George Bush was a hero in World War II, George, the father. And Roosevelt's kids, you know, all the way down the line, not anymore. And Schaeffer wrote a book called Keeping Faith. You've read that, Rich, too? Yeah. He was part of that effete, upper-class, private school milieu from Massachusetts. I know Frank. He was a writer and a movie producer, and his son joined the Marines. They went apoplectic.
Yeah, they
were
appalled.
They couldn't believe that, you know, and they fought against it. And Frank came around when his son was here, and by the time he came down for the family day, the graduation, he was a Marine in a sense. I mean, he had bought into the culture of it and realized it. But it was representative of the way people, their acquaintances and friends were saying, oh, geez, that's too bad about John. I'm sorry to hear about joining the Marines. That's terrible. And I think is representative of that, and I think that's representative of the press, and probably maybe going too far, but maybe where the journalism schools are nowadays too.
Where most of the schools are. I believe firmly in that. You know, Brokaw wrote that book about, you know, America's Greatest Generation, and I refer to mine as America's Worst Generation. and all the anti-military stuff coming in. When I was in high school, if you got accepted into a college and a high school paper, oh, Joe Smith is going to, University of North Carolina, Mary Smith's going to Ole Miss, blah, 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 blah. Well, there was two of us that wanted to go in the military because, believe it or not, we actually did want to fight in Vietnam. And because, our fathers were in World War II, grandfathers World War I, blah, blah, blah. And I felt it was a duty to go do this thing. But, when we told them that it wasn't something that they wanted to put into the newspaper, they said, well, we both got accepted into the United States Army. My buddy became a helicopter pilot, and I went to the parachute infantry regiment. We wanted to do this, but they didn't want to put it in our, but this is my generation, see? And now that they're older and older and their kids, the last thing so many of them want is their kids in the military, and they have such a horrible way of thinking about the military. It almost, when they talk about it, they almost cringe when they mention the military. And so many of them wanted me to be a victim of the military, and I said, I wasn't a victim. Not a victim of the Vietnam War. I was a casualty, but, God, I met some of the greatest people in my life there, and I hang out with some of the greatest people that I've ever met. But they don't understand it. It's beyond their realm of comprehension.
Take a look at graduation day at Parris Island and the families that are there. These are not college-educated people by and large. You can see they're blue-collar families, and poorer families, a lot of brown and black as well as white there. The people that are the so-called power structure, if there is such a thing in this country, aren't represented over there at Parris Island. They're probably at Fort
Jackson or any place else. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Well, that said.
Yeah, there we go.
Do you have any parting words for us? Any advice for these writers, or words of encouragement, or?
I don't. I mean, I've said my piece. I've really enjoyed very much being here. I appreciate the invitation, and it's a delight to talk with aspiring people, just as I'm an aspiring person myself. Yeah, I was lucky enough to happen to hit it with that, but you have to just have a goal, have a mission, and have the tenacity to stick with it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We were very fortunate to have you here. Thank you so much.